This sign is no coincidence. The universe is charting its course. The moment you stopped believing in coincidence, you have felt it. That precise, unsettling, quietly electric sensation when something happens that your logic cannot fully explain. A number appearing on the clock at the exact moment you were thinking of someone you lost. A book falling open to the page that held the sentence your soul had been searching for. A stranger on a train saying something so specific, so perfectly timed, that the air around you changed. You looked away. You told yourself it meant nothing. You filed it under coincidence and kept moving, because that is what you were taught to do. That is what the world around you trained you to believe. That reality is mechanical, that patterns are projections, that meaning is something the desperate mind manufactures to comfort itself in the dark. But you are here, right now, watching this. And something in you already knows that this moment is not random either. There is a kind of knowing that lives below the level of thought. It does not argue with you. It does not raise its voice. It simply persists, quiet, patient, impossibly certain. Beneath every layer of doubt you stack on top of it. That knowing has been trying to reach you for a long time. Through the timing of things that should not have timed the way they did. Through the appearance of people who arrived at the exact moment the old chapter needed to end. Through the loss that felt like destruction, but was, in truth, a precise and loving redirection. Through the dream that repeated itself until you finally paid attention. Through the conversation that found you on the exact day your soul needed to hear those words and no other. Through the memory that surfaced without warning and carried beneath its emotion a direction you had not yet been ready to follow. This video is not going to tell you what to believe. It is going to do something far more disruptive than that. It is going to show you what you already know and have been afraid to trust. Because trusting it means releasing something the mind has held onto with both hands. The illusion that if you think hard enough, plan carefully enough, control tightly enough, you can protect yourself from the pain of uncertainty. And the truth is, you cannot. But what you can do is something the rational mind was never designed to comprehend. You can surrender into the intelligence of what is already unfolding. You can learn to read the language the universe has been speaking to you in all along. You can stop treating the signs as noise and begin receiving them as the navigation system they have always been. Every sign that has ever found you was real. Every redirection you interpreted as failure was precise. Every moment of collapse that felt like the end was, in fact, the universe doing what it does when the path you are walking no longer leads where your soul agreed to go before you arrived here. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not forgotten. You are not a casualty of circumstance or a victim of timing. You are a soul in the middle of a design that was drawn long before your mind had the language to question it. And the discomfort you have been carrying is not evidence of abandonment. It is evidence of proximity. You are close to something your fear has not yet allowed you to name. And this video exists to help you name it. Stay with me. The language the universe speaks before words. Before language existed, meaning did. Before humans had names for the stars were already speaking. Before philosophy gave us frameworks for understanding the invisible was already organizing the visible with extraordinary precision. The universe did not wait for human vocabulary to develop before it began communicating. It has always spoken, in the language of repetition, of symbol, of sensation, of convergence. The tragedy is not that it stopped speaking. The tragedy is that most people were taught very early and very effectively to stop listening. And the cruelest part of that teaching is how seamlessly it disguised itself as intelligence. Think about the way a child encounters the world. Everything is alive with meaning. The shape of a cloud, the behavior of an animal crossing their path, the feeling that rises inexplicably in the chest when entering a room or meeting a person for the first time. Children have not yet been corrected into dismissing these responses as irrational. They have not yet been told that only what can be measured, replicated, and verified in controlled conditions deserves to be called real. That correction comes later. And it is so thorough, so culturally reinforced, so woven into the fabric of education and social reward, that by adulthood most people have learned to experience a profound sign, and immediately, almost reflexively, explain it away. The dismissal happens faster than the recognition. The rational override is so practiced it feels like common sense. But common sense is not the same as truth. And what has been normalized is not always what is real. The rational mind is a magnificent instrument. But it was designed for navigation within the physical world, not for reception of transmissions from the intelligence that organizes the physical world. Using the rational mind alone to interpret the signs the universe sends is like trying to hear music through your eyes. The instrument is wrong for the message, and yet, this is what the modern world demands, that every experience be funneled through the narrow corridor of what can be logically justified before it is allowed to mean anything. Everything that does not pass through that corridor is labeled superstition, projection, or wishful thinking. And so the very faculty that was designed to receive the universe's most important messages is systematically trained out of use. What the universe speaks in is not logic. It speaks in resonance, in the goosebumps that rise without permission, in the dream that refuses to fade by morning, in the persistent return of a theme, in conversations, in random articles, in overheard sentences that seems to be tracking you, finding you across contexts, refusing to let itself be ignored. These are not projections. These are not the desperate pattern recognition of an anxious mind. These are communications, intentional, precise, and calibrated to the exact frequency of your current consciousness. They are not meant for everyone at the same time. They are meant for you now, at this exact stage of your unfolding. The reason they arrive in this form, subtle, symbolic, felt rather than explained, is not because the universe is being cryptic. It is because the soul speaks this language fluently. The soul does not need a translation. It recognizes the sign before the mind has time to dismiss it. The body knows before the thoughts arrive. The chest tightens or opens. The breath catches or deepens. Something shifts in the quality of a moment before the mind has classified what the moment is. These physical responses are not accidents of biology. They are the soul's reception system, the instrument through which the invisible makes contact with the visible. Your work is not to become more intellectual about signs. Your work is to become more honest about what you already felt in the moment before you talked yourself out of it. The intelligence you have been second-guessing is the same intelligence the universe has been trying to reach. Why signs always arrive in the dark. There is a pattern that almost no one talks about, and yet every person who has lived through a serious crisis has experienced it. The signs do not arrive most clearly when life is comfortable, when the future feels certain, when the days are organized and the mind is calm. They arrive when everything falls apart. They find you in the aftermath of the relationship that ended without warning, in the quiet hours after the diagnosis, in the weeks when you could not see any path forward and the walls of the life you had built were closing in from every side. And the question that rises from this pattern is one that the spiritually awake cannot ignore. Why? Why would the universe choose the darkest moments to send its most important messages? The answer is both simple and profound. In the dark, you stop pretending. The noise of certainty, the constant low hum of plans, projections, and the maintenance of the version of yourself you present to the world, falls silent when crisis arrives. The scaffolding of the constructed life collapses, and in that collapse, the soul is suddenly exposed. Not damaged, exposed. And what is exposed is receptive in a way that comfort never allows. Pain strips away the performance. Suffering dismantles the architecture of avoidance. And in that raw, unguarded space, the signal the universe has been broadcasting for months, or years, can finally be received without interference. The static of the comfortable life is gone. What remains is the frequency that was always underneath it. This is why the sign you needed arrived the day after you broke down. This is why the right person appeared at the lowest point. This is why the message that changed your direction came not in a moment of confidence, but in a moment of complete surrender to the fact that you did not know what to do next. The universe was not waiting for you to be strong enough to receive it. It was waiting for you to be broken open enough to let it in. Strength, in the way the world defines it, keeps the walls up. And walls, however necessary they once were, are also barriers to reception. The breakdown is not the failure of the walls. It is their completion, the moment they have served their purpose and can finally come down. What the breakdown reveals is not weakness. It is the soul, unobstructed, finally audible to itself. Crisis is not punishment. It is not evidence of abandonment. It is a clearing, a precise and sometimes brutal removal of the structures that were blocking the frequency. When the universe needs to redirect a soul, it does not do so gently if gentle has already been tried and ignored. It does so with the force necessary to create the opening that the soul, at some deeper level of its own design, required. The pain is real. The grief is real. The disorientation is real. Every layer of that experience deserves to be honored, not minimized. But underneath all of it, if you are willing to go deep enough to look, there is always a sign. And the sign is always pointing toward something your soul agreed to, long before your mind got involved in the decision. The darkness was never the destination. It was always, without exception, the doorway. The illusion of control and the weight. You were never meant to carry. There is a weight that millions of people carry every single day of their lives without ever questioning whether it was theirs to carry in the first place. It is the weight of outcomes, of consequences, of futures that have not yet arrived, of other people's reactions, of circumstances that have already unfolded, of the endless variables that the mind, in its desperate bid to feel safe, attempts to hold in its grip simultaneously. This weight does not have a name that most people recognize. But if you have ever spent a night unable to sleep because you were rehearsing a conversation that had not yet happened, or replaying one that was already over and could not be changed, you know exactly what it feels like. You know the exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness. You know the kind of fatigue that sleep does not cure, because its source is not the body but the relentless attempt to manage what was never manageable. And underneath that fatigue, if you are honest, there is also grief. The grief of a soul that has been trying to do a job that was never its assignment. The ancient Stoic philosophers identified this weight with surgical precision and gave humanity a framework for setting it down. They called it the dichotomy of control, the radical distinction between what is within our power and what is not. What is within your power is limited and precious. Your perceptions, your intentions, your responses, your attention, your character, the quality of presence you bring to each moment. Everything else, the behavior of others, the timing of events, the outcomes of your efforts, the unfolding of circumstances, belongs to a category that is simply, categorically not yours to control. And the suffering, as the Stoics understood with piercing clarity, comes almost entirely from attempting to control what cannot be controlled while neglecting the cultivation of what can. The energy spent gripping the ungrippable is energy withdrawn from the only domain where genuine power actually lives. But the spiritual dimension of this truth runs even deeper than philosophy alone reaches. Because from the perspective of the soul, the perspective that holds the longer arc, the wider view, the memory of what was agreed to before this incarnation began, the attempt to control everything is not just exhausting, it is a denial of trust. It is the soul closing its hand around the very threads the universe is trying to weave into something the limited mind cannot yet see. Every time you force an outcome, you interrupt a design. Every time you white-knuckle a relationship, a plan, a timeline, you slow the arrival of what was already on its way. The grip is not protection. The grip is the obstacle, and the irony the soul recognizes even when the mind cannot, is that the tighter the grip, the further the desired thing retreats. Because the frequency of grasping and the frequency of receiving are fundamentally incompatible. Surrender is not the same as passivity. This distinction matters enormously, and collapsing the two has caused immeasurable confusion in the spiritual conversation. Releasing control does not mean abandoning discernment or collapsing into helplessness. It means recognizing the difference between your sovereign domain, your inner world, your choices, your response to what arrives, and the vast, intelligent field of cosmic orchestration that was never asking for your management. It means trusting that the intelligence which placed the stars in their configurations and calibrated the precise tilt of the earth to sustain life is the same intelligence directing the events of your life with equal and loving precision. Setting down the weight is not resignation. It is the act of a soul mature enough to know the difference between what it can build and what it can only receive. And in that act of setting down, the hands become open. And open hands are the only kind the universe can fill. Synchronicity, when the inner world bleeds into the outer. Carl Jung spent decades studying what he eventually named synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence of outer events and inner psychological states that cannot be explained by the law of cause and effect alone. He was not a mystic in the traditional sense. He was one of the most rigorous and intellectually formidable psychologists of the 20th century, and yet his own encounters with phenomena that defied rational explanation forced him to propose something radical: that there exists a connective principle in reality and a causal ordering factor that links the inner life of a person to the outer world in ways that carry unmistakable significance. He was not willing to dismiss what he had witnessed, and his unwillingness to dismiss it changed the conversation about the nature of consciousness permanently. Jung described synchronicity not as something that happened to passive observers, but as something that emerged at precise moments of psychological transformation. When the inner landscape shifted, when a belief cracked, when a denial collapsed, when an unconscious truth finally rose into awareness, the outer world seemed to respond. Events aligned, symbols appeared. Encounters occurred that bore an uncanny relationship to the exact psychological or spiritual movement happening beneath the surface. These were not coincidences in the dismissive sense of the word. They were correspondences, events whose meaning was inseparable from the inner state they mirrored, arriving with a timing and a precision that pure chance could not account for. They were, in Jung's understanding, evidence that psyche and matter are not as separate as the modern worldview insists. You have experienced this. The moment you finally made a decision you had been postponing for months, truly made it at the level of the soul, not just intellectually, and then the world around you began to rearrange itself to meet that decision. The phone call that came within hours, the door that opened within days, the person who appeared with exactly the resource, the information, the connection you needed, without you having asked. These are not your imagination. These are synchronicities, and they are not magical in the escapist sense. They are evidence of a principle as real as gravity, operating in the dimension of meaning rather than the dimension of matter. They are the universe confirming, through the language of outer events, that the inner movement has been registered. What Jung understood, and what the spiritual traditions of every culture have always taught, is that the boundary between your inner world and the outer world is far more permeable than the modern mind was educated to believe. Your consciousness is not sealed inside your skull. It participates in reality. It interacts with the field of existence in ways that have measurable consequences, not always immediately visible, not always comprehensible in the moment, but real and consistent. When you do the inner work, when you release a limiting belief, when you forgive what the mind had been carrying, when you realign your inner frequency with what you truly desire at the level of the soul, the outer world begins to reflect that shift back to you, sometimes immediately, sometimes through a sequence of events that builds over days or weeks, but always with a precision that, once you have noticed it enough times, becomes impossible to attribute to chance. The signs you begin to see are not random. They are the universe's confirmation that your inner rerouting has been received and that the field is already reorganizing itself around your new frequency. Numbers that find you. You have noticed them. You could not have not noticed them. The same number sequence appearing on the clock at the moment you were thinking of someone. The same digits following you across license plates, receipts, timestamps, addresses, repeating with a persistence that the word coincidence cannot credibly explain. You may have dismissed them. You may have searched them briefly and then returned to your day without fully landing in the weight of what was being communicated. But the numbers kept finding you, because that is precisely what they are designed to do. They are not random glitches in a mechanical universe. They are the universe using the most neutral, universally recognized medium available in human daily life: number, to deliver a message that requires no translation, no intermediary, and no special vocabulary. They appear in the infrastructure of your ordinary day because that is where you spend most of your attention. The universe communicates through the medium most likely to be seen. Angel numbers and divine numerology are not modern inventions. They are a system as ancient as human civilization's first attempt to decode the intelligence behind the patterns visible in the natural world. The Pythagoreans understood number not as a tool of counting, but as a living frequency, the language through which the universe expressed its most fundamental principles. Every number carried a vibrational signature, an energetic quality, a specific and consistent meaning that transcended culture and epoch. The ancients were not superstitious about this. They were precise. They recognized that number was the architecture of reality, and that sequences of numbers were sentences in a language the cosmos spoke to those who had developed the receptivity to hear. This knowledge was not lost. It was preserved, passed through mystery schools and esoteric traditions, carried across centuries by those who understood that the language of number was too important, too precise, too intimately connected to the structure of existence to be abandoned simply because the dominant culture had stopped teaching it. When you see the sequence 1111, it is not your mind seeking patterns in chaos. It is a transmission, a reminder that your thoughts are in the process of becoming form, that the field is highly responsive to your current frequency, and that alignment is close. When 444 finds you in the middle of a period of uncertainty, it carries the unmistakable signal of divine support and structural stability, a reminder that you are held, that the foundation beneath you is stronger than the fear in your mind. When 2922 appears repeatedly during a time of relationship tension or creative gestation, it communicates the divine principle of patience, of trust in sacred timing, of the necessity of waiting without the deterioration of faith. When 333 arrives in the middle of a creative or spiritual expansion, it marks the presence of higher guidance actively participating in your process. When 555 finds you in the middle of upheaval, it is not a warning. It is a confirmation that the change underway is aligned with the soul's design, however disorienting it may feel from within the transition. These are not messages from an external force speaking at you from a distance. They are the universe using the very fabric of your daily reality, the ordinary infrastructure of time and number, as a medium of communication. The message is not separate from your life. It is woven into it, placed precisely in the moments when your receptivity is highest or your doubt is loudest. The numbers do not arrive when you are distracted and unavailable. They arrive when something in you, at the level below conscious thought, is already asking the question they are answering. Pay attention to not only the number itself, but to what you were thinking, feeling, or questioning in the exact second it appeared. The message lives not in the sequence alone, but in the intersection between the sequence and the state of your soul, at the moment of its arrival. That intersection is where the transmission becomes personal. That intersection is where the universe speaks directly to you. The Hermetic mirror, as within so without. Among the most ancient and enduring bodies of wisdom the human civilization has preserved, the teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus stand as a foundational pillar of spiritual understanding across cultures, centuries, and traditions. At the core of the ancient Hermetic philosophy lies a principle so precise, so comprehensive in its implications, that once it is truly understood, the experience of reality is permanently altered. It is the Hermetic Principle of Correspondence, expressed in its most distilled form as above, so below, as within, so without. 7 words that contain, for those with the patience to fully inhabit them, a complete cosmology, a description of the structure of existence that makes both science and mysticism simultaneously more coherent. This principle is not a metaphor. It is a description of the actual structure of reality. The inner world and the outer world are not separate domains connected occasionally by coincidence. They are correspondent planes of the same singular reality, each reflecting the other, with faithful accuracy. What exists in your consciousness as a persistent belief, an unexamined fear, an unconscious expectation, that same pattern is simultaneously being projected outward into the circumstances, relationships, and events of your life. This is not poetic language. This is the mechanics of existence as understood by the wisdom traditions that predated modern science by thousands of years, and whose insights modern quantum physics is only now beginning to catch up with. The observer affects the observed. Consciousness participates in the construction of reality. The Hermetic sages said this thousands of years before the double-slit experiment. What this means for the signs in your life is both liberating and deeply humbling. If the outer world is a mirror, then every sign appearing in your external reality is a correspondence, a reflection of something alive in your inner world. The recurring dynamic that follows you from relationship to relationship is not bad luck or poor choices. It is the outer mirror faithfully reflecting an inner pattern that has not yet been resolved. The opportunities that keep arriving and then collapsing at the final moment correspond to an inner frequency that vibrates at the threshold of receiving but pulls back before full arrival. The sudden, unexpected openings that appear precisely when you have released a deep interior resistance correspond to the shift that just occurred on the invisible plane of your consciousness. The outer world is not doing things to you. It is showing you what is happening within you, and that distinction changes everything. Reading the Hermetic mirror requires radical honesty. It requires the willingness to look at what the outer world is reflecting without immediately deflecting responsibility onto circumstance, other people, or fate. Not because you are to blame for what you have not yet healed, but because the moment you recognize the correspondence, the power to shift the reflection returns entirely to you. You are not a passive witness to the signs the mirror shows. You are both the observer and the source. The inner work you do in the privacy of your own consciousness is not separate from the signs that appear in your outer world. It is the cause of them. And this recognition is not a burden. It is the greatest liberation the soul can experience within a human life. The sign in your outer world is not a verdict. It is a message from your own deeper self, delivered through the faithful mirror of reality, inviting you toward the inner transformation that will change everything you see when you look outward again. What you heal within, the mirror will no longer need to show you without. Soul contracts and the map you agreed to before birth. There is a framework for understanding human experience that has existed across spiritual traditions so diverse and geographically separated that their convergence on this single idea cannot be dismissed as cultural borrowing. From the ancient Greek concept of the soul's journey and its pre-birth choices, through the Vedic understanding of karma and dharma as agreements made across lifetimes, through the mystical traditions of Kabbalah and Sufism, through the spiritual philosophies held within indigenous traditions on every continent, the same fundamental understanding appears. The soul, before its incarnation, participates in the design of the life it will live. This is not a comforting story invented to soften hardship. It is a structural description of how the soul relates to its own incarnated experience, one that the wisdom of every major tradition has arrived at independently, and one that the most compelling near-death testimonies consistently confirm. This is the concept of the soul contract, not a contract in the legalistic sense, not a binding document of punishment and reward, but a sacred agreement made from the perspective of the soul's highest wisdom about what experiences, relationships, challenges, and turning points will best serve the evolution of that soul in this particular lifetime. The people who will enter your life at specific moments and change its direction. The losses that will crack you open wide enough for the light to enter. The detours that will teach what the intended path never could. The encounters that will feel, from the very first moment, as though they were always meant to happen. Because they were. These were not randomly assigned. They were chosen by a version of you that has access to a perspective your current human mind cannot reach. A version of you that chose with full awareness of the difficulty, because the soul values growth over comfort in ways that the human personality rarely does. This framework does not diminish the pain of the experiences it encompasses. It does not minimize grief or justify cruelty. What it does is offer the soul a way of understanding that restores meaning to what the mind experiences as senseless. The relationship that ended and left you devastated, it was a soul contract completing itself. The career path that collapsed precisely when you had invested everything into it. It was a redirection built into the original map. The person who appeared at your lowest moment and said or did the exact thing your soul required, they were fulfilling an agreement older than this lifetime. And you, in the moments when you showed up for someone else in a way that cost you something real, you were fulfilling yours. This web of agreements is not a prison. It is an architecture of love, designed by souls who trusted each other enough to agree to be present at each other's most essential moments. When you begin to read your life through this lens, the signs take on a different quality. They are no longer random encouragements from an indifferent cosmos. They are confirmation signals, the universe's way of acknowledging that you are on track, that the contract is unfolding as designed, that the difficulty you are experiencing is not deviation from the path, but an essential station on it. Every sign is a marker. Every convergence is a checkpoint. Every person who arrives at precisely the wrong time, by the mind's estimation, and turns out to be exactly right, is evidence that the map was always more precise than your fear allowed you to believe. And that map was always drawn with your soul's highest purpose in mind. When the sign you ignored became the lesson you couldn't escape, there is something the soul does that the ego finds deeply inconvenient. It does not forget. It does not move on from undelivered messages the way the surface mind moves on from an uncomfortable thought. The soul holds its knowing with extraordinary patience and extraordinary persistence, and when its guidance is dismissed, denied, or rationalized away, it does not retract the message, it amplifies it. It returns the same essential lesson through a different door, and if that door is also closed, it returns again, this time through a window or through the floor, or through a circumstance so significant that looking away is no longer an option. The soul is not cruel in this persistence. It is faithful. It will not abandon the lesson simply because the lesson is inconvenient. It is far too committed to the soul's evolution for that. You have been through at least one version of this. You felt the first sign and explained it away. There was a voice, quiet, precise, inconvenient, telling you something about a relationship, a situation, a direction you were headed. But the sign contradicted what you wanted, or what you had already invested in, or what was easier to maintain than to truthfully examine. So you found an explanation that let you continue as planned. And then the sign returned in a form that was harder to dismiss. And then it returned again in a form that hurt. And by the time the third or fourth version of the same lesson arrived, it arrived with enough force to make the avoidance impossible. It arrived as the thing you could not explain away, could not reframe, could not manage with the same tools that had worked before. And in the ruin of the avoidance, something became clear that had been available all along. The knowing that was there in the very first quiet sign, waiting patiently for the moment you would finally allow yourself to receive it. This is not the universe punishing you for not listening. The soul does not punish, it teaches. And its curriculum is designed with the specific inefficiencies and resistances of the particular human being it inhabits, fully accounted for. It knows exactly how much evidence you need before you trust what you already feel. It knows the exact threshold at which the comfort of the familiar becomes less tolerable than the discomfort of necessary change. And it calibrates accordingly, with patience, with precision, and with a love that does not flinch from delivering the difficult lesson when the gentle version was not enough. The escalation is not punishment. It is devotion. It is the soul refusing to let you miss what you came here to learn, no matter how many iterations of the lesson that requires. The compassionate recognition this invites is not guilt for what was missed. What it invites is something far more useful, the development of a more honest and responsive relationship with the signs as they arrive, before the amplification becomes necessary. The signs that are present in your life right now, the quiet ones, the ones you have been filing under coincidence or timing or stress, deserve a second look, not with anxiety, but with the honest curiosity of a soul that is learning in real time to trust what it already knows. Not every quiet sign requires immediate action, but every quiet sign deserves honest acknowledgement. The question worth sitting with is not why you did not listen sooner. The question is, what are you feeling right now, in this moment, that you have been explaining away? What has been speaking quietly that you have not yet been willing to hear? The sacred role of the pause. The culture you inhabit has declared war on stillness. Silence is filled immediately. Waiting is reframed as inefficiency. Empty space in a schedule is seen not as restoration, but as a problem to be solved by adding more activity. The mind, trained by this culture, interprets the pause, the unexpected stop, the period of apparent inaction, the season when nothing seems to be moving forward, as evidence that something has gone wrong, that the momentum has been lost, that you are falling behind some invisible standard of progress that you accepted without ever examining whether it was your own. And so rather than inhabiting the pause with the quality of presence it is designed to produce, most people flee it. They fill it. They force it to end before it has had the chance to deliver what it arrived to offer. And in that filling, the very wisdom the pause contained is lost, available only to those willing to remain in the discomfort of not yet knowing long enough to receive what only stillness can carry. But the universe operates on a completely different understanding of time than the one your productivity culture has handed you. In the intelligence of the cosmos, pauses are not interruptions of the plan. They are the plan. They are the moments in which what has already been set in motion is being integrated, positioned, and prepared for what arrives next. The caterpillar in its chrysalis is not failing to be a butterfly. It is in the precise stage of transformation that makes the butterfly possible. The seed in winter ground is not dead. It is doing the invisible work without which the spring has nothing to reveal. And you, in the season that looks like stillness from the outside, are doing work that no amount of outward movement could accomplish. You are being reorganized at a level the busy mind has no access to. When your life enters a pause, when the phone stops ringing, when the path ahead goes quiet, when the next step refuses to clarify itself no matter how urgently you search, the universe is not withholding from you. It is positioning you. It is using the stillness to do something inside you and around you that forward momentum would have prevented. The pieces of what is coming cannot arrive until the space that will receive them has been cleared. And sometimes, clearing requires a stop. Sometimes the most important work of your entire trajectory happens in the seasons that look, from the outside, like nothing at all. The pause is not empty. It is full of the preparation that the next chapter requires. In the deep quiet of a pause, if you resist the urge to immediately fill it with distraction or force, something extraordinary becomes available. You begin to hear the frequency beneath the frequency. The guidance that could not reach you through the noise of constant doing begins to filter through. The sign that had been waiting for your attention to settle long enough to receive it finally lands. Insights arrive that had been circling for months, unable to enter through the busyness. The soul begins to reorganize itself around a truth it could not access, while the performance of productivity was consuming all available attention. Old layers release, new clarity forms, and what emerges from the pause when it is inhabited honestly is not the person who entered it, but a version of you that the movement never had time to become. The pause is not where your story stops. It is where your story prepares to become something your previous pace of living could never have carried, and your previous self could never have held. Emotional chaos as a compass. There is a widespread and deeply damaging misunderstanding about what it means to feel lost, anxious, grief-stricken, or overwhelmed. The misunderstanding is this: that these states are problems to be solved, symptoms of something wrong with the person experiencing them, evidence of fragility or spiritual immaturity. The therapeutic industry has inherited this misunderstanding from a medical model that treats discomfort as pathology. The self-improvement industry has amplified it by turning the management of negative emotion into a measure of personal development. And the result is a civilization of people who spend enormous energy trying to eliminate the very signals their souls are using to communicate with them. The instrument is being silenced at precisely the moment it is speaking most clearly. Emotional chaos is not a malfunction. It is information. It is the soul's alarm system, precisely calibrated to the exact nature and location of the misalignment it is detecting. Anxiety is not a random chemical event. It is the soul's response to a future it can sense the vibration of, and its urgent communication that something about the current direction requires examination. Grief is not weakness. It is the soul's recognition that something of genuine significance has ended, and its insistence that the ending be fully honored rather than bypassed. Confusion is not stupidity. It is the soul standing at a crossroads where the mind's usual maps no longer apply, and requesting a new orientation that can only come from a deeper level of inner listening. Even rage, when examined beneath its surface heat, is often the soul's response to a boundary that has been violated for far too long. A signal not of dysfunction, but of dignity asserting itself. Every difficult emotion, when received with honesty rather than managed with strategy, carries a specific and actionable message. When you stop treating your emotional turbulence as evidence of inadequacy and begin treating it as navigational data, everything changes. The anxiety that arose at the thought of a particular decision was not irrational. It was the soul saying, "This direction carries a frequency that does not match where you are going." The grief that would not lift around a particular loss was not weakness. It was the soul insisting on the full processing of something that held enormous significance for your path. The confusion that descended at a particular crossroads was not a failure of intelligence. It was the soul requiring you to slow down enough that the next sign could be received without being missed. And the restlessness that arrives without clear cause, that unnamed persistent sense that something needs to change, is not anxiety without object. It is the soul pointing toward a direction the mind has not yet had the courage to name. The emotional body is one of the soul's most sophisticated instruments of guidance. It does not perform. It does not strategize. It does not protect your ego from discomfort. It reports with radical honesty the state of your alignment. And by doing so, it points, unfailingly, toward what requires your attention, your compassion, and your willingness to change. The path to inner transformation does not pass around the emotional chaos. It passes directly through it, with the understanding that what you find on the other side of honest feeling is not more suffering. It is clarity. And clarity, for a soul learning to read signs, is the difference between wandering and arriving, between enduring the journey and understanding it, between surviving the storm and recognizing it as the precise instrument of your navigation. The geometry of fate. Nothing arrives out of order. Sacred geometry is the study of the mathematical patterns that underlie the structure of the natural world, the spirals encoded in shells and galaxies, the precise angles of crystal formations, the ratio known as the golden mean that appears with uncanny consistency across biological systems, artistic masterpieces, and cosmic structures. What sacred geometry reveals at its core is that the universe is not chaotic, it is ordered, not in the rigid mechanical sense of a machine, but in the living, dynamic, mathematically elegant sense of an intelligence that creates beauty and precision simultaneously, at every scale of existence, without exception. From the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower to the orbital mechanics of planetary systems, the same ratios, the same angles, the same relationships of proportion appear, as if a single mathematical mind drew the blueprint for all of it and encoded its signature into the structure of every created thing. The geometry of fate operates on the same principle. Nothing in the unfolding of a soul's life arrives in disorder. What appears as randomness is, in the vast majority of cases, a convergence whose pattern is simply larger than the human eye can track in the moment of its occurrence. The relationship that ended 3 years ago and seemed like pure loss. Its ending was a precise coordinate in a geometric design that positioned you to be exactly where you needed to be when the next essential element of your path arrived. The setback that cost you time and resources and confidence. It introduced exactly the delay required for an intersection that, had you arrived earlier, would have missed its target entirely. The person who left, they completed their arc in your design, and their departure created the opening through which the next essential arrival could enter. Every element of your story was a coordinate. Every turning point was an angle. Every loss and every arrival was a measurement in a design of incomprehensible beauty. This is not a retroactive justification of suffering. It is a description of the actual structure of a life lived within the intelligent field of the universe. The Hermetic tradition, the Pythagorean understanding of mathematical harmony, the mystical teachings of sacred geometry, all point to the same recognition that existence operates according to principles of elegant, purposeful order, that the human mind, from its position inside the experience, rarely has enough perspective to perceive while the design is still in progress. The artist, standing with their face 1 centimeter from the canvas, cannot see the painting. The distance required for perception is not available from inside the brushstroke, and yet the painting is being made, with precision, with intention, with the kind of care that does not cut corners and does not waste a single line. What this invites is a specific quality of trust, not the blind trust that refuses to engage critically with life, but the earned trust of a soul that has lived long enough to look backward, across its own journey, and notice, with something approaching awe, that not one essential element arrived out of order, that the timing, however excruciating in the moment, was always precise, that the person, the event, the opening, the closing, all of it was calibrated with a geometric intelligence that had the entire arc in view, even when you could see only the piece directly in front of you. And what was true of the past is true of the present. The geometry is still operating. The design is still unfolding. Nothing arriving in your life right now is out of order. Not the difficulty, not the delay, not the thing that has not yet arrived. All of it is a coordinate in a design being drawn with the same precision as the spiral in the shell and the orbit of the star, near-death wisdom, and the signs, the returned ones carry. Among the most compelling bodies of evidence for the deliberate intelligence underlying human existence is the testimony of those who have crossed the threshold of death, or come close enough to it that the ordinary boundaries of consciousness dissolved, and then returned. Near-death experiences have been documented across cultures, across centuries, across radically different religious and philosophical backgrounds, with a remarkable consistency that cannot be easily dismissed. Those who return do not report chaos. They do not report meaninglessness. They report with a consistency that researchers have found both moving and scientifically challenging. A universe structured by love, intention, and precise design. The accounts differ in their imagery and cultural coloring, but the essential experience they describe, of being held by an intelligence that is both utterly vast and utterly personal, remains strikingly, insistently the same. What those who have returned describe about signs is particularly significant. They speak of a life review, not a judgment, but a comprehensive experience of every moment of the life lived, seen from a perspective of complete understanding. In that review, the moments that appeared accidental are revealed as intentional. The encounters that seemed random are shown to have been orchestrated. The suffering that felt pointless is illuminated as the specific pressure required to produce a specific transformation in the soul. The person they resented is shown to them in the full context of their soul's agreement, as a teacher, as a necessary catalyst, as a soul who loved them enough before incarnation to agree to play a difficult role in their story. What seemed, from inside the life, like a wound turns out, from the vantage of the review, to have been a gift, one whose wrapping was too painful to see through at the time of its delivery. Those who return carry this knowledge in their bodies. They come back changed not because they encountered the afterlife, but because they encountered the truth about the life they were already living, its design, its purpose, and the loving intelligence that had been directing every sign along the way. And what strikes those who listen to their accounts is not the mystery of what lies beyond death. It is the revelation of what has always been present in life. The signs these returned souls describe as having been available throughout their lives, signs they often did not recognize until the review, are precisely the ones this video has been naming: the repetitions, the convergences, the encounters at impossible timing, the losses that redirected, the pauses that repositioned. From the vantage point of the review, they were never subtle, they were unmistakable, and the only thing that ever prevented their full recognition was the fog of fear and the noise of a conditioned mind that had been trained to look everywhere except inward. What they carry back is not a theology. It is a frequency, a quality of presence, of attention, of trust in the intelligence of the unfolding, that those of us who have not yet crossed that threshold can access right now, in this life, through the cultivation of the same receptivity that death, for a moment, makes involuntary. You do not need to reach the threshold to receive what the returned ones received. You need only the willingness to be as honest, as present, and as undefended as the moment of threshold forces a person to be. The signs have always been there. The intelligence has always been present. What changes is the quality of attention you bring to a life that was always, in every moment, speaking directly to you. Learning to trust the rerouting. The door closed. You know the one. The opportunity that dissolved at the final moment. The relationship that ended when you were certain it was meant to continue. The path you had invested years in building that, without warning, stopped being available to you. And in the aftermath of that closing, the mind did what minds do. It cataloged the loss, calculated what was spent, and built a case for how this proved something irreversibly wrong about your circumstances, your choices, or your worth. It turned the closing into evidence. Evidence of failure, of poor judgment, of a universe that giveth and taketh away without reason or care, and you carried that evidence forward into the next chapter, without realizing it was shaping the lens through which you were reading everything that followed. But what if the closing was not the loss? What if the closing was the navigation? The universe does not close doors randomly. It does not remove options as a punishment or a test of endurance. It removes options when the option being removed is no longer aligned with the soul's highest design, and when the soul's continued investment in that option would prevent the arrival of what is actually intended. Every closed door in your life has been an act of redirection, a loving and precise removal of a path that, had you continued down it, would have led you further from the convergence your soul came here to experience. The door was not taken from you. It was completed. It fulfilled its purpose in your trajectory, and its completion was the condition required for the next opening to become visible. You were not abandoned at the closed door. You were redirected by it. This is one of the hardest truths to receive in the moment of the closing, because the mind does not have access to the information the universe is using when it closes a door. The mind sees only the thing that is gone. The soul, if given space to speak, would tell you something different. It would tell you that the redirection is not a consolation prize. It is the actual destination, routed more efficiently now that the longer path has been cleared. The detour is not secondary to the journey. The detour often is the journey, the specific, irreplaceable passage through which everything the soul came here to learn becomes available. And the things learned in the detour, the resilience, the self-knowledge, the capacity for trust built precisely because the expected path was removed, are often the most essential things the soul came here to develop. Learning to trust the rerouting does not happen overnight. It is a practice that builds through the accumulated experience of looking back at previous closings and recognizing, with the clarity that only hindsight grants, that they were precise, that the thing you grieved the loss of would not have led where this moment has led you, that the universe knew something you did not, and acted on that knowing with a fidelity to your highest good, that your ego, in its attachment to the familiar, was not yet capable of matching. Each time you recognize this in the past, you build the capacity to trust it in the present. Each act of trust in the present trains the soul to remain open in the future, even when the door closes and the next one has not yet become visible. And in that growing capacity for trust, something remarkable happens. The time between the closing and the opening begins to shorten, because you are no longer spending that interval in resistance. You are spending it in readiness. And readiness, it turns out, is the condition the universe was always waiting for, the frequency of alignment, how to stay open to the signs. There is a quality of attention that makes a human being extraordinarily receptive to the signs the universe is continuously sending. It is not the frantic, grasping attention of someone searching desperately for confirmation of what they hope to be true, nor is it the dulled, distracted attention of someone moving through their days on autopilot, processing reality through the filter of habit and assumption. It is something rarer and more deliberate than either, a quality of open, grounded, wonder-oriented presence that keeps the inner antenna clear and responsive to the frequency the cosmos is broadcasting. It is the attention of someone who has decided quietly and without performance that their life is a conversation worth showing up for, and that the other side of the conversation has been speaking all along. This quality cannot be manufactured. It cannot be performed. But it can be cultivated through a shift in orientation that is simpler than most spiritual traditions make it sound. It begins with the decision to treat your life as a conversation rather than a monologue. Most people move through their days speaking, through their thoughts, their plans, their inner commentary, their projections about what comes next, without ever pausing to listen for the response. The universe is always responding. The signs are always present. The field is always organized around the frequency you are emitting and the questions your soul is carrying. The question is whether the quality of your attention creates the conditions under which the response can be received. And the first step toward those conditions is the simplest and the most difficult one. Stop. Be still long enough to notice what is already there, in the space between your thoughts and your next planned action. Cultivating receptivity means slowing down enough to notice what you normally process unconsciously. The feeling that arises in your body when you are about to make a decision that is not aligned with your soul, that contraction, that quiet unease, is a sign. The unexpected thought that arrives during a moment of stillness and carries an unusual quality of clarity or weight. That is a sign. The pattern you suddenly notice across conversations, across dreams, across the things your eyes land on without apparent intention. That is the universe arranging the field of your attention to deliver a message it needs you to receive. None of these require a special gift or an unusual sensitivity. They require only the willingness to be present enough to notice what is already happening, and honest enough to take it seriously before the rational mind has had the chance to explain it away. Staying open to signs is also, ultimately, a practice of remaining in wonder. Wonder is not naivety. It is the sophisticated recognition that reality is far more vast and intelligent than the categories the conditioned mind uses to organize it. A soul in wonder does not need everything to be explained before it trusts. It does not require certainty before it moves. It lives in the productive tension between not knowing and deep inner trust. And in that tension, it remains infinitely more available to the guidance that logic alone could never deliver. You do not need to become someone who sees signs everywhere in a way that destabilizes discernment. You need to become someone who is honest enough, and still enough, and wonder-filled enough to recognize the ones that are real, and courageous enough to let them change the direction of your life. Because that is what signs ultimately ask of you. Not belief, not performance. Courage. The courage to trust what you already know, and to move accordingly. You are always being guided. There is a truth that has been present throughout every word of this video, and it is time to say it plainly, without metaphor, without softening, without the distance of abstraction. You were never lost. Not in the way the fear told you that you were. Not in the moments of collapse. Not in the periods of confusion. Not in the seasons when the signs were not visible and the silence felt like abandonment. In every single one of those moments, the guidance was present. It was simply operating at a frequency that the fear in your mind was not yet calibrated to receive. And the fear was not your enemy in those moments. It was simply the last layer between you and the trust that was waiting on the other side of it. Every sign that found you was real. The number that appeared at the exact moment. The song that arrived on the day you needed it most. The stranger who said the thing that changed something in you. The closing that felt like destruction and became a door. The pause that felt like failure and became the preparation. The loss that felt like the end and became the beginning of the version of your life that your soul had agreed to reach. None of it was random. All of it was deliberate. Every single element was placed with a care and a precision that the rational mind, standing inside the experience, simply did not have the vantage point to recognize. But the soul knew. At some level, in some quiet place beneath the grief and the confusion, the soul always knew. And the intelligence that designed it, the same intelligence that calibrates the movement of planets and the unfolding of seasons and the precise moment a seed breaks open in the dark, was always, in every instance, directing it toward your highest good, even when your highest good looked nothing like what your comfort wanted, especially then. Because the soul's highest good and the ego's comfort are not the same thing. And the universe, which holds the blueprint of your soul's purpose with perfect fidelity, will always choose the former, not as cruelty, but as devotion, not as abandonment, but as the most intimate possible form of love. This is not a comforting story the mind tells to make peace with hardship. This is the actual nature of the reality you are living inside. The universe is not indifferent to you. It is not a mechanical system producing events without regard for the souls moving through them. It is a conscious, intelligent, responsive field that knows your name. Not the name on your documents, but the name your soul carries, the frequency that is uniquely and irreplaceably yours. And it has been in conversation with you since before this lifetime began. The signs were its sentences, the synchronicities were its punctuation, the redirections were its edits. Not corrections of error, but refinements of a manuscript whose final form was always more beautiful than the draft your fear was trying to protect. And this conversation has never paused, not once, not even in the silences that felt like absence. What changes now is not your circumstances. What changes is your relationship to them. The anxiety does not vanish because you understand it as a compass, but it begins to lose its authority over your choices. The uncertainty does not disappear because you trust the rerouting, but it stops feeling like evidence that something has gone wrong. The signs do not become louder because you have decided to receive them, but they stop being filtered out by a mind that was trained to dismiss what it cannot explain. The same life seen through the lens of this understanding becomes a different experience, not because the facts change, because the meaning does, and meaning, it turns out, changes everything. You leave this moment not with a technique, not with a system, not with a set of beliefs to adopt and defend. You leave with a recognition that was always already true, that you were placed here, in this time, in this body, on this specific and unrepeatable path, with full cosmic intention, that everything that has found you, including this video, including this moment, including the particular question that was living in you when you pressed play, was part of a design drawn long before you arrived here to live it, and that the soul at the center of your experience, the one that has persisted through every season of doubt and darkness and disorientation, was never confused about who it is or where it was going. It was always oriented. It was always moving toward this. It was always being guided, and so were you, and so are you right now.